All right, everyone. Good morning. It's Wednesday morning briefing from the Celtic Way with me. Hamish John is here as well.
Hello.
Hello, John.
Hi, good morning, Hamish. Good to see you. Good to see everyone in the chat. Good to see everyone down below as well. Not down below. That sounds a bit weird, Hamish. I mean below the line in the comment section.
I'm just going to let you
Okay.
keep talking there. That's what I should do. Right, okay, tell us about this then, just to kick off.
Yeah, we've got a new subscription offer. It's £1 for 6 months of access, a full 6 months for £1, and you get this free print, this free Jota print, which is a cracker from the football artist made by Frank, who you may be aware of on social medias and stuff like that. It's an A3 print. It's not a tiny wee postcard or anything. It's a big print. So it's a fantastic offer. All you need to do is go to celticway.co.uk/subscribe. It's a subscription to the website. It's not to the YouTube channel. It's £1, as I say, and that's what you get. And as you'll agree, I mean that's a stunning bit of art that I'll be putting on my wall, Hamish.
Yes.
So everyone else should get involved as well.
Have you not got a wee collection of Frankie's
I do behind
stuff
me.
as well?
It's all blurred at the moment. I put a blur on my thing because everyone was commenting on my background, but I've got a wee blur now. So
yeah, so you can check that out as John says, a wonderful offer, £1 for 6 months of access of the Celtic Way. And yeah, I think the coverage is worth that, more than that. Certainly the Jota print is certainly worth that. Okay, before we get started, just a quick word from our sponsor. This Celtic Way video is brought to you by S1 Jobs. If it's time to hand in your transfer request, then head over to s1jobs.com and upload your CV today. With thousands of jobs across Glasgow, Edinburgh and the surrounding areas, you'll find the one at S1 Jobs. Start your search today. Busy all day yesterday, John. There was a number of things happening. What do you want to start with?
We'll start with the injury stuff from Brendan Rodgers. So he's saying Kasper Schmeichel might be out for 5 or 6 weeks, which I think is the first kind of confirmed timeline we've had from anyone official. There was lots of chat about he might be out longer, he might be out for the season. I think 5 or 6 weeks is an initial estimate. Gives him a chance at least to get back for the end of the season. And obviously coming from Brendan Rodgers is more reliable than some of the reporting we've seen around it. I mean, that's good news for me because there was chat that he might be out for months and months and months. But just over a month isn't too bad from my perspective. And obviously Sinazalo will have to step up in the meantime. And then Liam Scales is back in training as well, but won't be available for this weekend, but for the build-up to Kilmarnock. That was the chat from Brendan Rodgers as well. So a couple of bits of injury news from the manager, who gave an interview on Celtic TV, I think. So that was welcome yesterday.
Okay, so Kasper, 5 to 6 weeks, as Brendan said. Kasper doesn't think it will be as long as that, so he's clearly backing himself to get back. Yeah. But I think I worked out earlier, 5 to 6 weeks, you're maybe talking second weekend in May, which I think is the weekend of our 36th league game. So potentially, if he was to get back for that, you'd be talking 3 league games and possibly a Scottish Cup final as well. So he's still got a part to play this season, but equally, Vil Sinazalo has got a number of games ahead. Certainly, he's going to get the Cup semi at Hampden, isn't he? He's potentially going to get Ibrox as well. We'll wait and see to really kind of convince us all that he could be the successor to Kasper.
Yeah, and I think obviously Schmeichel will be desperate for his teammates to get into the Scottish Cup final so he can kind of experience that occasion at the end. That would be the biggest match on the horizon for him. And I thought Sinazalo was good. I've not been on the channel since the weekend, but I thought he was pretty confident and accomplished. Obviously had that good save in the first half against Hearts, and looks like he can step in and kind of do the job for Celtic. I think Celtic in general against Hearts were pretty good. I thought Callum McGregor was absolutely outstanding, Hamish. I thought he was really good for that, whether he was on the pitch. It was really good to see him back. But in terms of the goalkeeper, I'm not too stressed out about it. It looks like it might not be as catastrophic a loss, and over a short-term period as you might fear when you first see the headlines that Kasper Schmeichel's under your shoulder. So it's looking all right in the position.
Henry McClassen pointing out 5 to 6 weeks in Brendan time is about 4 months. I think with James Forrest that certainly was the case. Good job from Sinazalo at the weekend. He's going to continue at St Johnstone on Sunday, and an opportunity for him. So that's good. You did mention Liam Scales as well there, didn't you? So he's potentially back for Kilmarnock, although I don't even know if he would play at this stage. I guess Austin Trusty's another one. Was there been any news on him?
No, well, he was in the match squad at the weekend, so it's nothing to like. He's not like out injured or anything. I think it was maybe a case that he returned to training later last week rather than having the full build up, and so it was. Rodgers said he wasn't quite ready to start, which I took as like he was starting Narodsky as kind of an alternative for Trusty, not out of pure selection, but perhaps a bit of fitness there as well. And that Austin Trusty will be coming back into the team probably this week. So I guess we'll find out at the weekend what Rodgers' plans are for that position. But it seems to me like Trusty's going to come back in, and he just wasn't quite there where Rodgers needed him to be for that Hearts game.
Any thoughts on Narodsky over the past couple of games? I think he's been fairly decent against, in a bad performance against Rangers. He was half decent. I thought he was good again at the weekend.
I think he looks solid defensively. Yeah, there's no issues there. I think maybe what Rodgers is thinking, and we've spoken about this before, is just this kind of speed of ball progression from the back into the midfield areas. And I don't know if Narodsky's the answer for that. It'll be down to Rodgers' personal preference or what he sees as like the strongest unit. But I don't think he's done himself any harm at all. I mean, I think if you look at this time 3 weeks ago, I think everyone would think, well, Narodsky's never going to play for Celtic again, and he's going to be away in the summer. He's put a couple of good performances under his belt, so he's done himself no harm at all. Again, it's another one where I wouldn't be stressed out if Narodsky's playing against St Johnstone. I just wouldn't, based on what we've seen over the last couple of weeks. So that's not too much of an issue for me. And likewise, if it's Trusty and Carter Vickers, I think they seem like the most functional partnership at the moment. But I guess we'll find out. I mean, again for Narodsky, it's always more difficult. I know we played Rangers, and that's a difficult game in itself, but it is always more difficult sometimes going away from home as a Celtic defender, where it's a little bit more physical and teams rough you up a bit more. So that would be something to consider for the weekend as well.
He's maybe struggled a little bit at times with that, Narodsky, so far. There's been a few away games last year. I think, to be fair, when we were going through a real tough period, I remember a game at Easter Road and Pittodrie as well. I think he was at fault for, I think Miovski scored a really good goal that day. So, but then again, you probably say the same about Austin Trusty. Like, Austin Trusty's best games for us have come arguably at the highest level. Like in Munich, I thought he was great. But when he goes away to Dundee, for example, he maybe gets roughed up a bit and struggles. So I think he's got to learn as well. But I feel all right about Austin Trusty, and hopefully he's back for the weekend. Okay, there was a few Scottish football stories, John, and one I want to touch on to begin with was about the Concerns Champions League qualification next season, and the SPFL have quite simply brought in the opportunity for teams who are playing in the final round of UEFA qualifiers to postpone the third league match of next season. Now, the third league match is the one between the two legs. So this obviously concerns us because we know we're going to have a Champions League playoff tie. And basically we're going to have the opportunity to postpone the league game in between those two legs, which I'm always a little bit skeptical of kind of how much that actually matters. I mean, we've just come off the back of a derby where we had a full week to prepare, and Rangers had about 48 hours, and they beat us. So, but I think this is good news in terms of Celtic having the opportunity to rest between what are two very important legs.
I think it's just one of those common sense approaches that arguably probably should have been in place before now. Scottish football can be slow to change sometimes and slow to introduce policies that are for the benefit of everyone. And I don't see why any club would have a problem with it. And again, it's an option for clubs that are competing in Europe. I don't even know if Celtic will do it. Sometimes Celtic just like to get the games played. I know that Brendan Rodgers has kind of said that before, but at the same time, if it's going to be a particularly tough tie, then you really want as much rest as possible. And we see teams in Europe that Celtic play sometimes do this. So to have the option of doing it, I think is a benefit to everyone. Nobody really loses out. And it's just trying to help as many Scottish teams get into these group stages as possible, which is obviously good for the clubs financially, good for the league, good for everyone really. So I'm a fan of that one coming out from the SPFL yesterday. That kind of approach.
Yeah, as you say, it just makes a lot of sense, and you are kind of questioning why it's not happened in the past. There's been so many debates about it over the years, and I mean, just the pettiness of Scottish football, isn't it? And why should they have the opportunity to do this? We didn't get it years ago, and that's probably why it's not happened up until this point. But eventually, they've come up with I think a pretty fair plan, not favouring any clubs. Just any club playing in that round gets the opportunity. I would argue they should maybe go further and give you maybe before the first leg as well. But because I mean, these matches are worth like 20 times more money than the whole league season is to a club like Celtic. So I'll be interested. I mean, do you have any doubts over whether we would actually take it?
I think they probably would, wouldn't they? I think it's one of those ones you don't really complain about, but it's like if any kind of slight advantage you would look to take. And I think you're right. These games are so important. I mean, we know what the Champions League has done this season for Celtic, and I think a lot of fans were really energized by the Champions League campaign this year. And if Celtic don't get into it, then it puts a bit of a downer on the season just from the off. It's not even just financial. I just think it's about the prestige and the interest around the club, and the excitement around the club is really supercharged by the Champions League, especially with this new format where you're guaranteed these games. You're going to be playing 7 different teams. Like, it's very exciting. And I think, dropping into Europa League isn't, it just doesn't have that wow factor. So I'm anything that helps Celtic get into that group stage, I think or the league phase as it's now called, is undoubtedly a really good thing. Yeah.
Okay, a really good thing from the SPFL. Do you just want to repeat what you just said? A really good thing from the SPFL. Are you going to be saying the same about this other chat, Stephen McGowan and the Herald reporting this, that the SPFL are having discussions and are planning league reconstruction, and it's kind of pick a number at this stage. And the number they're going for is 10 teams. Yeah. Okay, give me your thoughts, and then I'll tell you why I don't care at all about any of this.
Well, I'm actually quite similar to you. Like, on a personal basis, I'm not that fussed, but I understand there's been an outcry across some, and like people think it's maybe a backward step for Scottish football, and I understand those arguments. There's 2 things for me which makes this whole conversation, it was always going to be inevitable. One is that with the increase in matches in UEFA competitions, compromises were going to have to be made somewhere in terms of the reduction of matches. Now, I don't think anyone's quite ready to wave goodbye to the Scottish League Cup. And so they were never going to scrap that. And so they maybe need to look for ways to reduce the fixture calendar elsewhere, because it's just getting ridiculous. It's getting ridiculous across the board. Domestic football, European football, international football. So I understand the kind of desire to reduce that to 36. I know it's only 2 matches, but it can make a difference, especially if there's bad weather and things get postponed, etc. I think reducing that makes sense to an extent. And I think the other thing, of course, is that the SPFL, and this is what winds some other Scottish football fans up, but the SPFL are so keen to preserve those derby matches every year that sell the TV package to Sky, basically, the 4 matches. So I don't think it was ever going to be this thing where it's, it goes to 16 or 18 and the teams don't play each other often. I'm not a big fan of the top 6, bottom 6 split personally. And so I think getting rid of that is a good step. I understand it, though. I understand that nobody really wants this kind of closed groups of clubs. Yeah. And everyone's playing each other all the time and it gets a bit boring. I totally understand that. But that's the kind of boat that Scottish football's in. I think... And so there was always going to have to be a solution of some sort found. I don't think any of it's ideal, to be quite frank with you. I think the issues in Scottish football kind of go beyond what the fixture calendar is and go beyond what the kind of league reconstruction is. And so I think it's a weird one for me, Hamish. I personally don't mind it that much, and I can see why they're doing it, but also understand that fans of other clubs and stuff, they want a progressive approach, a more flexible, modern approach to the league. So there's all sorts of issues around it. How do you feel about that?
I genuinely, and I spoke about this earlier in my own channel, but I don't particularly care about it, and I'm sorry if that comes across badly, because we are going to discuss it a bit, so I'll try and care a bit, but it doesn't particularly matter to me in terms of following Celtic during the course of a season. And I think one of the reasons for that is that I don't really get too much excitement from Scottish football anymore. I get excitement from watching Celtic, obviously. Every single game I watches, I look forward to it, I enjoy it. Some games more than others, the derbies, the games at Hampden, etc. But it's the Champions League stuff is the stuff that absolutely gets me going. That's the stuff that keeps me up late at night. It's the stuff that I talk about for days in advance, weeks in advance of it, days, weeks afterwards. And like Scottish football for me, just it doesn't quite have that same excitement anymore. So I'm kind of not as fussed about whether it's 12 teams, 10 teams. I get that a 10-team league is probably viewed as a backward step, because we used to be like that, didn't we? And I think it changed in 2000. So the feeling would be that you're going back to that, and that's not going to go down well. You're also making your league smaller by its very definition, when people want the league to be getting bigger. But I think there's positives that would come from it as well. And I know I'm probably going to be the minority here, because I know 14-team leagues, 16-team leagues are quite sexy, aren't they? Because you've got, new teams and new matchups and different formats and all that. But a 10-team league, I mean, half of the league would be Celtic, Rangers, Hearts, Hibs and Aberdeen. So you'd have games against those teams pretty much every second week. Now, I know, again, that could become monotonous and boring, whatever, but the current format's kind of like that. So I don't think it would be a massive change. As you've outlined, 18 teams, 16 teams, it's not going to go, because Sky aren't going to go for it, because immediately you're halving the number of derby matches. Not just that, you're halving the number of Edinburgh derbies, you're halving the number of Celtic Hearts, Celtic Hibs, Celtic Aberdeen, and you're replacing them with potentially Celtic Raith Rovers, or Celtic Dunfermline, or Celtic Falkirk, Celtic Ayr. And fair enough, those matches might be new, and maybe in an ideal world, if you were starting from scratch, John, you would look at it and go, 16's the right number. But the reality is that Sky aren't going to want to change to 16. I've heard people mentioning 14, but I think that's a little bit of an untidy format, if I'm honest.
Yeah, I think one of the things,
the reality.
I think one of the things as well, you can come up with these formats where it doesn't split, evenly across the division. It could be a top six, a bottom 8. I think there's some kind of desire to keep some sort of symmetry to the season where it's not so lopsided. I know there's models out there. I think Belgium is one of them, where it just gets all crazy after a certain point of the season, and stuff points reset, and then there's
the half points and they round up.
Yeah, they've got a formula for
imagine that in Scotland.
Yeah,
never happened in Scotland. We're too petty.
Yeah, that's too much. And I think there's it's difficult. Scottish football puts so much pride and tradition and kind of the history of Scottish football, right? And so I don't think there's anything ever going to be too radical. I kind of agree with you. You threw the entire thing out when you were starting from scratch, and you would have this group of 16 teams or whatever. It might make sense, but it seems a little bit too fractured. Ultimately, the reality is, for all what fans want to see, the clubs vote for self-interest. They always have done, and people accuse Celtic and Rangers of that, for example, and that's true to an extent. But every team in the Scottish Premiership votes in the sense of self-interest. So if they are going to, your Hearts, your Hibs, your Aberdeen, they're going to try and make the top flight as much of a closed shop as possible, which is not something I necessarily agree with, but it's just the reality of the situation. So if they can ensure that they have as tight a grip as possible and relegation is as difficult as possible, then they're going to do it. That's the reality of it. And again, I think it is all around the TV deal, isn't it? It's all about the kind of derby matches, like you say, Celtic Hearts, Aberdeen Rangers. Like those are all pretty pretty big matches for a TV audience. Even the Dundee Derby, for example, can be sold in a different way. And I know teams go up and down. I know all these teams aren't always in the top flight, but it's almost inevitable that it was going to change, I think. And I think they're trying to find the least worst option, if you know what I mean. It's not really the best option. It's kind of the least worst option.
Yeah.
And, it's hard because there might be creative thinking out there that has a more radical approach, but I just don't see Scottish football ever having the kind of the guts to follow something that isn't kind of recognised and well known already.
Do you remember the 888 proposal of about 10, 15 years ago, where basically, just to refresh everyone's memory, you've probably forgotten about this, but you would start with two leagues of 12. So I think it'd be like SPL 1 and SPL 2. And then over the course of the season, halfway through, it would then split into 3 groups of 8. So you'd have a championship group, a middle group deciding promotion and relegation, and then a bottom 8. That was my ideal scenario. But I used to care so much about this stuff, but I just think from a Celtic point of view, 10, 12 teams, there's really going to be a minuscule difference. The reality is that you're going to have 2 fewer matches in the league per season, but you're not going to notice any other real differences. To be honest, I don't even feel particularly strongly either way about the split. I don't feel a connection to the split and want to keep it, but equally I think the split can work all right pretty well if it's a close title fight and you have the top teams playing against each other. But equally, the split's a bit daft, like, let's be honest, and it can be a bit unfair at times, and it's just explaining it to people more than anything. So having your 36 fixtures out at the start of the season, I wouldn't be against that, to be honest. See, just to go to your the topic or the point you made at the start about European football, and 10 games we had this season, we've got 10 guaranteed next season in Europe. I think the next cycle, I think 2027, I think UEFA are going to push for more matches. They wanted 10 in the league phase for this cycle. You might remember when it was initially announced, it was 10, and they were forced to go down to 8. So I think they're going to push again for 10. We are going to have to probably create more space. I mean, is the League Cup going kind of inevitable?
In the next decade, I'm definitely not betting against that whatsoever. I think if UEFA do increase the matches, then where do the matches come from? And the League Cup isn't something that's established across Europe either. It's no. There's only really a handful of nations that actually have it. So that, and again, even like in England, I think there's European qualification from the League Cup, but in Scotland, there's not even European qualification anymore. So there's nothing around it other than the prestige of winning it, which is exciting in itself. Everyone loves a day out of Hampden, etc. But I think if you're looking at something that is superfluous in Scottish football, that would be the first to go if UEFA do pursue a plan, or all these European Super Leagues, etc., etc. I think football is heading in this kind of more global fashion, for better or worse. And again, there'll be some people who are totally against that. I think the expansion of European formats or intra-league competitions, I think, is going to increase. And I think as long as it's maybe UEFA sanctioned and there's a kind of pyramid or access system in place that makes it fair for everyone to try and get in and be involved, I think ultimately would be backed by supporters over the long term. I know there was a big, massive backlash to the European Super League when it first came around, but I think the main factor for that was that it was just such a closed shop and that they didn't have any access system in place whatsoever, and that really drove that backlash initially. I think if UEFA or whoever sell this vision of European football that maybe is more regionalised and has, I think people might get behind that over time. And I think football is moving in this kind of European direction. And I think it is inevitable. And I think people might need to start getting their heads around it and whether they want Celtic to be involved in this or not, because it's going to be one of those big arguments, I think, over the next decade. There'll be people who want to, stay with tradition in their back pocket and have a lot of value, place a lot of value in the kind of Scottish game, etc. And then there will be people who want to kind of forge a new path forward with Celtic in alternative competitions. And I think I mentioned on this recently, but I think if there's a further erosion of stuff like away days in Scotland, then I think that's only going to increase, because if there's no unique selling point of Scottish football of going out with your pals on a week-to-week basis, going up and down the country in buses, if that is taken away further and further, then, it starts to look inevitable that there will be a swell of opinion that says, Celtic might be looking at bigger things than the Scottish League.
Yeah, a lot of good points. Henry McClarson saying no more trebles, which is a bit of a thought. We've been getting used to winning trebles, but potentially if it happened, I mean, I think, nothing obviously imminent here, but I think over the course of the next 10 years or so, I think the discussion is going to move on to potentially create more room. As I say, European football is only going to grow in terms of the number of matches. As I say, 10 games this year, it's only going to grow from that. And if you're talking about replacing a couple of Celtic domestic matches against Kilmarnock and St Mirren, no disrespect, and replacing them with a couple of high-quality Champions League matches where you've got an opposition team like Club Brugge, for example, not a huge name, but a team like that coming and playing great football and taking the game to us. That's where I want Celtic to be. I never personally want Celtic to leave Scotland. I'm not talking about Celtic going to England. That's just not going to happen. But the prospect of more and more European matches and less of the domestic stuff, and the European stuff almost becoming the majority of the season, which I think is the way things will go. Sign me up for that, because those Champions League games, mate, like those 10 games this season, how good were they? Like, they were, what a journey it was, and that's what you want to see from Celtic. Add a bit of domestic stuff into that, and I think we've got our perfect mix.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's always, the ideal is always going to be a hybrid of the two. I don't want Celtic to leave Scottish football either. It's just, if you read the tea leaves of what is happening around Europe and the way competitions are being pushed, and UEFA kind of been forced into this situation where they're having to expand their offering, it seems inevitable at some point. So you either ride the train and get a seat, or you're on the outside looking in, really. That's the reality of it. And it's no coincidence that Celtic's chairman, Peter Lawwell, is so involved in the European Club Association and so involved in the UEFA Club Competitions Committee. Celtic want to be involved in these things moving forward. And I know they've been so adamant that they're part of the UEFA framework and they want to work within UEFA. But I think it seems that the UEFA are keen on expanding their offering as well. So, again, it seems inevitable whether you like it or not. Yeah.
Plunge saying Celtic versus Ross County is mouth-watering, isn't it? Well, it can be plunged, maybe not all the time, but any game with Celtic is always worth watching. Just to round up this thing, the potential league reconstruction requires 11 out of 12 Premiership clubs to go for it. Also, and this just sums up Scottish football. It also requires 8 of 10 in the Championship and 15 of 20 in League 1 and 2 combined. I mean, it's just, nothing makes sense in the governance of Scottish football. I don't know how we got here, but do you think this is going to go through?
I think there will be some sort of change has to go through. Again, I just think with the amount of fixtures, I think the SPFL need to look at their own next decade and consider, well, what makes sense for us. And I think a reduction of matches is what makes sense as much as anything. And if they can sell it in a way that, there's talk about appeasement of some of the lower league teams and offering them more or offering them other opportunities if they do cut it to 10. But these things in Scottish football, it just becomes a bun fight, as they say, and everyone has their own agendas, and there's no kind of real vision for Scottish football. There's no unifying vision for Scottish football, and I think that's a shame. I think there should be more of that. But again, Celtic get accused of voting in self-interest, but every single club in Scotland votes in self-interest. So it'll ultimately be decided by Celtic and the clubs what they want. And I think for me, it's inevitable that there'll be less domestic matches over the next decade than there have been over the last decade.
Yeah, something has to happen. At least we don't have a new club World Cup starting in the summer. I don't think Celtic will ever be part of that. But then again, I think Salzburg are in it this summer, so maybe we're not too far away from that.
I'm not quite even sure what the access is around that, but I think there's all sorts of coefficient stuff and all that around it. So maybe one day, Hamish, maybe if things do pick up in a European sense for Celtic. But Celtic need to get their ducks in a row for Europe as well. It's not just about automatically qualifying. Celtic need to be performing at that level, and that's obviously something we've talked about a lot over the last while and will continue to talk about. We want Celtic to achieve at the European level when they have an opportunity to. And that's so important. And I agree. I'm with you. Like, that is what excites me most at the moment. And I think that's what excites a lot of Celtic fans at the moment is this kind of European thing around the club. It's a cliche, but it did bring a buzz around the club this year. There's no doubt about it. Like, this season was more exciting because of the Champions League than without it.
I think just final comment, the big things, even UEFA get Saturday match days for the Champions League, like not talking about the final, but during the season. I think they'll push for that in the next cycle. That'll be a huge moment because that'll be the domestic football interrupted by the European stuff. So keep an eye out for that. Okay, we're pretty much up, John. Anything else on your mind at the moment?
No, nothing. We've got lots on the site. We're obviously got Tony. If you don't know, Tony has an interview with the Hollywood actor Tony Curran up on the YouTube channel. Part 1 is already live. Part 2 is going live this evening at 6 o'clock. There's also an interview for website subscribers on the website with Tony Curran as well. So if you fancy that, Tony's had really good feedback on it in the comments from what I saw earlier. People really enjoy Tony's chats when he gets to sit down and gets to have a long chat with someone. People enjoy that. So if you're a fan of films, you're a fan of Tony Curran, fan of Tony Haggerty, then go and check that on the channel. It's right there listed for you right now.
I've not even looked, but I guarantee he's called it the Two Tonys or something like that.
I think he was angling for that. I've went for something a bit, not the Two Tonys, but I think he does mention the Two Tonys within the first 5 minutes of that video, yeah. So you can go over and have a wee look at that.
What a hero. I definitely will be. Okay, plenty more on the website, as John says. Plenty more from me in the morning briefing this